Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Good evening and welcome to a episode of Tochnyi Talks, where we will talk about the current situation in the United States of America's politics in relation to aid to Ukraine. And today we have a special guest, which is Will Attig. Welcome, Will.
Hey, Erlend. Really pleasure to be here, especially with all the listeners. And as always, it's great to be with the Tochnyi crew, who great area to put a lot of great information out. So it's really a pleasure to be here supporting Ukraine, and hopefully helping folks understand, get a better grasp of what's going on Capitol Hill, a place where I've spent way too many hours of my day in support of Ukraine in the last few months and 2 years.
Yeah, well, I can imagine that it's been a stressful few months lately. So we have a bunch of people in the panel: Andrew, Daniela, Joseph, John, Germinate Ukraine. So I guess you'll be hearing from most of us. What is this discharge petition? Because for me, as a European, it makes me a little bit confused because I'm not used to this kind of things happening in the U.S. Congress.
Yeah, definitely. I want to first off, I meant to say it earlier, but first of all, I want to just say that I'm here to represent myself, Will Attig, in my own capacities or my own views. They do not represent the views of any organization, any politician, or any government agency. That's just kind of just to make sure that everything's on the up and up when it comes to where I'm and what I can say today. A discharge petition is a tool, a mechanism in the House of Representatives to be used to be able to bypass holdup of legislation. It is mostly used by the minority. If in the American House, the Speaker calls which bills will be voted on, which bills will go to the floor. But if a bill is not called to the floor, there is the ability to do a discharge petition. It's a very difficult process. It's a process that puts a lot of pressure on both parties when they're doing that, because usually it's over contentious issues. It has been successful in the past for a few bills, but the majority of them have failed in the past. But that's where we're at today. Is that we find ourselves in a position. Over the last 8 months, we've been working to create a supplemental aid package for Ukraine that has changed in many different ways throughout the last 8 months. But we find ourselves at a place where we've got a bill passed in the Senate, and it's being held up by the leadership in the House. A bill that I think everybody, when you listen to them talk, whether it's the minority leadership or folks from that have been supportive of Ukraine in the past, is that if a bill gets called to the floor, it will pass. But as of this point, we've had to use there's had to be the use of this mechanism to put a lot of pressure on the Speaker to try and bypass his logjam to stop aid to Ukraine in the supplemental package.
Yeah, so I remember, talking to you, it must have been during the summer, and you were like, there's this big bill being constructed, and lots of aid is probably going to go to Ukraine. So what is this bill, and like, how was the process before it eventually ended up in the Senate and the House, and in this very bizarre political confrontation that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Ukraine?
Yeah, definitely. So, after, early last year, while you saw that very first large package of aid, armored vehicles, things that were, I put quotation marks up, designated for the counteroffensive, the spring counteroffensive. The minute that aid had been passed and that equipment had been allocated and sent, pushed to Ukraine, folks in DC automatically went to working towards an actual big package. We still have to remember that we've only been at this, it seems like a long time, but it's 2 years, a little over 2 years. And when you look at the way the escalation of aid has gone, it has gone in a slow but deliberate and sometimes not as fast enough way. But the packages early on, I think, were much more on the piecemeal side, stopgap side, and the goal starting, early last year was to put together a package, both from the DoD, the administration, and the supporters of Ukraine in the House and the Senate, a package that would be able to provide enough aid for Ukraine for the next couple of years so that they don't have to worry 100% about the electoral process in America. But also the most important part was an aid package that was big enough that could put a lot of pressure on the industrial base of Russia. And again, we've talked about, I remember talking to you about different numbers and things, but this bill started off, again, how this process was made was Ukrainians and US experts and the DoD and the MOD worked together to try and find what was needed for Ukraine, what was going to be needed, what was needed for the success and victory of Ukraine in this conflict, and the actual proposal. So when the administration puts together a proposal to send out, that's all it is, and then Congress has to create a bill. But that proposal kept getting messed with the last leadership in the House. It started off as a bill that was at the top end. Hopefully, they started off between 85 to 105 billion dollars was a number that was talked about quite a lot. And that was a number that, from the words of the folks at the White House, would be able to, completely help dismantle the Russian military, make them, struggle greatly, and most importantly, it would put massive strain on the industrial base of Russia to be able to keep up with those numbers because of the amount of aid that would have been able to be transferred to Ukraine over the upcoming years. That was definitely whittled down numerous times. And then we've seen some other outside factors happen. So the proposal got whittled down to around $60 billion. There was, then requests by the former Speaker of the House to add some other things. They added, Red Sea. They added some Indo-Pacific money. And then the Gaza conflict started in Israel. So what we saw was a big package kind of put together. But one of the last things that was a bargaining tool was a $10 billion amount of money for the border security. That was a deal that was made with McCarthy in the House. Unfortunately, right before he lost his power as Speaker, he had withdrew support for that package, and it was pretty much dead on arrival. And since then, it's been a constant struggle to try and figure out a pathway, a vehicle to get as much aid as possible to Ukraine. We saw it in the Senate, where there was a long conversation about adding border security to it. There was a long bipartisan process to include a bipartisan immigration package along with it that's built into this. Unfortunately, there were some problems with that. They instead of it just being a funding bill, it turned into more of a policy bill, which was not what was meant for this. And we saw what happened where the Republican side decided not to support that bill. But what was the most important part of that was we saw the bill get rewrote, where we see what we have now, a $95 billion supplemental aid package that will help support Ukraine to the max at over a $60 billion level, support for Israel, humanitarian support, and then support for the Indo-Pacific and Red Sea. These are all important things. And then, and lastly, a large amount of humanitarian aid for Ukraine and for the civilians in Gaza. Things that everybody in the House and the Senate can get behind. This is a bill that, again, can be passed, But unfortunately, we've seen the party leadership in the House decide to completely hold this up. This is again, this is something that should have been done 3 months ago. We've seen the effects. The reality of this bill should have been passed right before Speaker McCarthy lost his leadership role. But since then, we've seen the devastating effects of the lack of a large-scale support for Ukraine, and we're seeing it every single day. And right now, we were faced with the reality that there's a bill sitting in the House that's already passed in the Senate. The Senate has said that the leadership in the Senate has said that any other bill will be very difficult to pass in the Senate. Any changes, any amendments, etc. So we're just waiting on three major options. And Erlend, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about before we get completely into discharge petition. But the three different types of things that could happen as early as next week, but then also going into like what a discharge is and like how the actual process of that works.
Yeah, so like for me as a European, it's kind of difficult to understand everything. But for me, it looks like for some reason in the Senate, you can see a lot better kind of a cooperation happening between the aisles, and you saw different bills getting passed in the Senate, while in the House they got blocked. Can you maybe speak a little bit to why that is happening and why that is important as well before we go to the discharge petition?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's a very interesting state of play in American politics right now. I think that we're at a place that we've actually almost never seen ourselves at in our history, at least modern history, where we have a Republican Party that's a little different. That the Senate is a little different than the House, but the House is a very divided place. Even in the Senate, you see a very divided Senate. Usually, you see the leadership of the Senate or the House be able to control their caucus. But over the last few years, we've really seen the Republicans really lose control of their caucus because there's very big competing views and values in there. In the Senate, there's people that want to work together, get things done. But I think most importantly was that the leadership is controlled by Chuck Schumer, who is an avid Ukraine supporter. And instead of holding up the bill, which is what the Republican leadership did in the House, they were the ones that led the charge to make sure a bill got on the floor that could be passed. And the reality of it, this $95 billion supplemental package is not the most perfect package, but it is still an extremely good package. A lot of compromise went into it. But now we see, all the compromise in the Senate kind of be forgotten about in the House. But the House is a very interesting place right now. There's a lot of dynamics that goes into that. Right now with Israeli aid, there's problems with a small minority of the Democratic caucus. But the most unfortunate part that I see is that we do not have the courage of the Republicans who have supported Ukraine in the past to be vocally supportive of Ukraine in the last couple of weeks, especially the last 2 months. We've really heard, people say silence is violence. And the reality of it is that the silence from the majority of the majority side of the House has been pretty deafening and destructive in the last few weeks. And we find ourselves in a place where we're trying to do everything we can to get this bill passed.
Yeah, and then I guess we can go a little bit into the details of how the process has been towards because we heard about like this option as for a discharge petition. I think since Christmas times, people started talking about it, and even before. But how has the people who are now signatories or bringing this this discharge petition to the table, like how did that uh, how did that process start? And I can imagine that there's been talk also to the other side of the aisle before fielding it. So why is it coming up now, and how do you think it's gonna uh, uh, how is the process gonna continue?
So I want to kind of just take one step back before we get directly to the discharge petition, because
Okay.
the reality of it is, and why the discharge petition is coming up right now, is that the minute that the bill was passed in the Senate to support Ukraine, to support our allies, to give the men and women in the trenches the encouragement and the breathing room that they need to be able to fight the Russians. The minute that it was passed in the Senate, the minority leadership in the House said that they would use whatever tool they have on their table to make sure this bill gets passed as quickly as possible. And that process started, weeks ago now. So when we look at the minute that the bill moved from the Senate to the House, there's kind of really three major options to do it. The fastest way to get a bill passed in the House is through what's called suspension. And to me, the number one option that could be done is Speaker Johnson decides that he wants to support democracy and freedom and live the values of the Republican Party that I knew when I was younger, and just simply put the bill on suspension, where it takes a 2/3 majority vote. It bypasses the amendment process. It bypasses the Rules Commission, where there's a lot of people who do not support Ukraine in the leadership of the Rules Committee, and puts a vote on the floor. And that could happen as early as Monday if they wanted to do that. And by Tuesday or Wednesday, President Biden could have this bill signed, and we could have aid flowing, quickly to Ukraine. So that's option number one. The second option is for general order. So the bill would have to go through committee. It would have to go through the amendment process. It would have to go through the Rules Committee for an accelerated process, which would take a lot of work, because the Rules Committee is kind of the leadership there is much more on the radical kind of right side of things. But then it would also be faced with the possibility of people on the far right to make as many amendments as they want to. And unfortunately, I really fear about like poison pills, things being added to a bill. And then the process would have to go back to the Senate. The Senate would have to vote on the new bill, extending the process. Right now, as of today, the leadership in the House, the Speaker Johnson, has not directly said he would do any of the first two options. So that leaves us with the process of having to pull out all the stops. I think throughout the last 2 weeks, the pressure has risen. We see the need for this aid. We see what the lack of aid that this hostage taking that the House GOP has done. We see it directly on the table. We see it directly in the videos. We see it on the map that Andrew puts out every day or every other day. That the reality of it is, like, the time is running out when it comes to, I never say the winning it, but it's going to cause a lot more problems the quicker we do this. And again, those two options, the first one is the quickest, but the reality of it is, I think that we're at a point where we need to want to do two things: either rely on the discharge petition as the vehicle to get things through, or put enough pressure on Speaker Johnson to call the bill to suspension next week. And by having a lot of people on a discharge petition, it actually does do that, by put a lot of pressure on the leadership to try and take action on this and not lose face, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for rolling back a step there. So we're now at the stage where the discharge petition has been basically fielded, and quite a few signatories have already arrived. So how's that process working? You told me yesterday, I think, that this is like a very archaic, old-fashioned way of doing things in the U.S. democracy, and people actually have to go to a certain office and sign something, etc. Physically. Does that also complicate the process? And yeah, like I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about how this thing is working because you haven't really seen it in U.S. politics for a long
It
time.
does. It does, and we've seen it even in the response to people who support Ukraine in some of the statements about we saw yesterday about why people weren't signing on yesterday to the bill. So to go to the actual discharge petition itself, right? So the tool that's being used right now is there's two dueling discharge petitions, and it is a bit of an archaic way of doing things. First, again, going back to what a discharge petition is when you face a log jam. When the Speaker of the House is refusing to call a bill, this is a way to go around them. So it's important. So what it has to be done is a discharge petition needs to be presented to the House to gather signatures to gain a minimum of 218 signatures, which is the majority of the House, that will then allow the discharge petition to be in order, which will then allow the members of Congress to vote on the actual bill that the discharge petition is for. I know that's very complicated, but what it takes is what we had today was Representative McGovern earlier this week decided that it was time to push a discharge petition. He worked with the leadership of the Democratic Party, and he delivered a discharge petition to the clerk in the House floor. And this is where we've got to be very, the nuances of this, practice is a little old school. It's not something that's been advanced. Like if you're trying to sign on to a bill, there's an email system. If you're co-sponsoring bills, there's a system for that that you can do digitally. You can do if your staff can do on it. But for a discharge petition, because it is a public rebuttal to the leadership of the House, has to be public. And the members of Congress who signs onto the bill have to physically do it themselves. So they have got to walk into the chamber, sign a petition that's on a clipboard. It is kind of old school. And then those names are recorded and then released publicly. That being said, so earlier this week, Representative McGovern, who I've been lucky to be in press conferences with supporting Ukraine, is adamantly. I remember being at a press conference with him, over almost a year ago, that was warning about the exact problem we're at right now. And lucky enough, he was the one that was willing to put this discharge petition out there. It was kind of unprecedented because in a matter of less than 18 hours, we've had 177 members of Congress sign on to the bill. When a discharge petition or a bill goes up for co-sponsorship, the reality of it is not having the idea of getting that many co-sponsors or signatures that quickly, especially with it being physical, is pretty unprecedented. 177 is pretty good, but it's about 41 shy of the actual needed number where we're at right now. So we do have 177 Democrats signed on to the what's called discharge petition number 9, HR 1016, which is the number of the bill, and that is the bill that will allow the Senate version, the Senate supplemental package, to be voted on. So it was unprecedented to get that. We saw the leadership in the Republican Party do a few things. They, instead of keeping folks in town, they released them early, which I think was a little interesting. That didn't help get more signatures because the minute that they leave town, they can't sign physically. I think that was a bit of a stall tactic. But we did see that 177 folks sign on to a discharge petition. And at the same time, we did see another discharge petition that is more of a, in my opinion, symbolic or pressure discharge petition gain 8 Republicans. So there's been 8 Republicans who publicly decided to buck Speaker Johnson when it came to support for Ukraine. So that is a good sign.
Yeah, and at this moment in the stream, that's where I feel I'm a little bit on unstable waters, because now we're getting into really details of American politics. So
Okay.
think I'm gonna ask the Americans from Tochnyi here to kind of ask not necessarily the rest of the questions, but some of the questions that might be relevant from here. So I guess John, Joseph, Andrew, please go ahead.
The one thing I wanted to say lastly when it came to this is that we saw signatures stop at the end of Wednesday. People will not be able to sign until Monday. So we do know that there was a number of Democrats that were out of town, whether they were campaigning, a few had medical visits. There's quite a few that we believe will still sign on. So there's been a kind of like a jump to attack every single person who's not signed on just to what right now. But we need to make sure that if there is like innuendo, people saying that there's a coordinated effort, we need to make sure that we give a little bit of a time. I think on Monday we'll see the numbers jump up quite a bit.
Go ahead, John.
Well, I was just going to be, I guess, a little bit more direct as a follow-on and just ask, going forward the next week or two, obviously once the current budget situation is resolved, hopefully without an additional continuing resolution, and before the House goes into recess for 2 weeks after the end of next week, I believe, do you think this can get, done or most of the way there within, the next week or two?
Yeah. So for the interesting part about a discharge petition is one of the things that we haven't heard a lot. We've heard a lot about kind of on the Twitter space, which I'm hoping to kind of like help, settle, put better information out than some of it, is that no matter what, the discharge petition will not get done next week. The reality of probably the only way for a bill to get passed next week is if Speaker Johnson puts HR 815, which is a supplemental package from the Senate, up for suspension. That could get done next week. For a discharge petition, once you get your 118 votes, say signatures from both the Democratic side, and we know we're going to need some Republicans, there's a 7-day waiting period that no action can be taken on the bill. And this is where it gets, I apologize for getting really nuanced on this. Once that 118 number gets on the bill, there has to be a 7-day waiting period before the clerk can call the discharge petition to the floor, and they can only call the discharge petition to the floor on the second and the fourth Monday of the month, which means the earliest that this could be voted on in the House, if it was through a discharge petition, would be, I just want to make sure I double check my notes really quick on this. I believe it's April 8th would be the first Monday that this could happen. But again, if we could have some support from the Republican Party, we could have this bill voted on Monday through suspension.
Real quick, I want to clarify. There's a Mark in the chat who mentions that there's no legislative session on Monday, so it might be Tuesday. Would that be accurate?
Correct. So if the 19th, are they not? I think they're. I have not seen the exact date that they're coming back. They're out of session right now, so they might not be coming back until Tuesday, which that makes sense. So that'll be the first time. That'll be the time that votes could happen. So yes, I apologize for that.
Yeah, no worries. Just clarifying it, just like real quick. Yeah, okay. Does anyone else have? Andrew, do you have any questions?
It's not really a question. I just worry a lot about the whole poison pill. But I don't know if you want to talk about that more later.
So which poison pill is the question? So there's quite a few poison pills. The one thing that's really good right now is the bill that we're talking about the most, the one that I will only kind of support and talk about as an actual vehicle, as we call a vehicle to pass legislation in a reasonable way, is HR 815, which is the Senate version of the supplemental package. Which the reality of it is there is no true poison pill in there. There's parts of the bill that many different parts of the different caucuses do not support 100%. But there's nothing in there that is directly a poison pill compared to, say, the other discharge petition that does have, a very nuanced poison pill that would not make this go forward.
Is there any way one can get put in the process, or is it pretty much we're at the stage where the discharge petition just happens and then we're good?
So through a discharge petition, there's no amendment process, and also through suspension, there isn't an amendment process. So there's two options that allows a clean bill to be voted on, so that we don't have to send it back to the Senate. Like there's a lot of conversations. There was a little bit of a Hail Mary by Johnson Thursday morning to talk about a Lend-Lease type bill that was a non-starter, and we saw Mitch McConnell come out and say pretty much definitively the only way for a package to get passed in the Senate is if it's the Senate bill that they sent over there without poison pills.
Got it. And go ahead.
But unfortunately, right now, and just to put that straight, the poison pill for, say, we'll say the poison pills that were talked about in the Senate during the immigration fight, the poison pill that we see in the other one is policy changes. It's not funding. The idea that there's a couple of immigration policies in Fitzpatrick's version of this. The reality of it is the biggest poison pill right now is the idea of Ukraine aid, I think, because we know that the GOP supports Israel aid. They've passed bills saying that. We know that they, as a majority of folks, support this stuff. But it seems like because there's Ukraine aid in there, it seems like that's what's being held up. And I can't see how that is the poison pill that's stopping this. Now, hopefully that changes very shortly, and they find a way to get past that. But unfortunately, right now, that seems like the biggest issue that we have.
Do you anticipate the inevitable political ruckus that is going to occur over the inclusion of security assistance to Israel? Do you anticipate that being a significant hurdle going forward?
So I think that has been something that we've looked at ever since the conflict started in Israel, and we've always known that is a very touchy subject. Right now, there are 30. Like, if you look at the up-to-date numbers of what we're doing right now, again, we need to get to 218 signatures on this to make it move forward to get a vote. Right now, we're at 217. There's 36 Democrats not on the bill, but 0 Republicans on the bill. So, what we see right now is we've always known that there's a small minority of the Democratic Party that's on the very far left of things that are adamantly against any offensive weapons to Israel. We know that number, the most clear number on that. There's a hard line about 8. I think that's up to about 12-ish right now. When we look at the 36 Democrats and when you go through it, and I saw someone in the feed talk about Katie Porter, we believe, we know for a fact that there was numerous Democrats who were going to sign on to this bill who were not in town the last 2 weeks. One is Andy Kim, a veteran, someone who I truly work with on a very regular basis. And he came out and he said, the minute that I'm back in DC, I'm going to physically walk up and sign this bill. I believe the number is closer to the 26 number right now, about 26 Democrats that we'll have to work on. But I believe the final number will be under 20. But that means that we need, we need around 20 to 25 Republicans decide that they support Ukraine. That's all we need. So that's actually pretty good. I mean, the idea for a very controversial bill, like a bill that is taking a hard time, to try and get one party 100% behind it is going to be hard to do. And the reality of it, if we get this down to 15, Democrats who don't vote for it, that's a pretty good day's work when it comes to lobbying in DC.
Yeah, I have a question about the event that we see on the screen here, because I think that's interesting. How much veteran, like the different veteran communities have gathered to support Ukraine. I think that's, to be honest, like for me, it's been emotional to see that. It really makes me happy to see a lot of veterans coming together and support Ukraine. And what was happening in DC the other day?
Yeah, I think there's been a big showing of support for Ukraine from the veterans community. From the way you look at some of the early ranks of NAFO to some of the vocal supporters on the Hill. I'm very blessed to be able to work with a lot of former military members who are members of Congress, work with other organizations. My day job is to lead a veterans organization that does a lot of work for advocacy. And veterans have really taken a role in this, really, really stepped up. I was lucky to help walk with a group of American veterans on the second anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, with the ambassador and many other folks from Ukraine in Washington, D.C., with an organization I have that is focused on veterans in Ukraine. But also we've been working with another organization called Vote Vets, who on Monday announced that they had made a $100 million or $100,000 ad buy, really putting pressure on Johnson. And then they had a really powerful press conference with almost a dozen members of Congress from both the Senate and the House, mostly veterans, talking about, I think the best line of the day was a member of the Air Force, retired Air Force pilot, Mickey Sherrill, who said, in the military we have a saying that if you're not going to try and solve the problem, get out of the way, because people are going to do it. And the reality of it, that was the call to action for Speaker Johnson to say, just let the vote happen. Let the chips fall where they are. You've stopped this enough. Let a vote happen. And I am very confident if a vote happens, whether it's a suspension vote or a regular order vote, it will pass with bipartisan support. And we'll be able to, be very proud that at a time in history when Ukraine really needed aid, we were able to get it to it. It's unfortunate that we've had to come down to this point in time, though.
So I kind of recognize whenever there's some decision that is taken on like the very upper level that everyone is waiting for when you're in the military, whether it being something bureaucratic or political. We had this saying, which is like triple T's, TTT. Things take time in my military. I don't know if you can recognize that.
It does take time. And I saw the quote that I might have said 118. I'm pretty sure I have said 218 a couple times, just helping out with the chat. The number to make sure a discharge petition gets passed is 218. That is a full majority of the House. Bills, sometimes you don't need 118. Depends on who's voting there. But I think that's a great point, Erlend, is in the Army, in the American Army, we call it tactical pauses, taking your time, understanding that things take time. And I think that's a lesson that I think a lot of us who have been, working to support Ukraine, working to, either lobby our members of Congress, raise money, give information out, is that, we don't understand exactly what everything is being done behind the scenes, and things take time. When you think about the supplemental packet, it's been being worked on for 8 months now. There's reason why aid ran up. There was a reason why it was in the schedule was done early, so that it would have been passed 4 months ago ish. So things do take time. But the hope now is that we're at an inflection point. We're at a point where I enough pressure is being applied, and I want to make sure that anybody who's listening, if you have the ability to help the idea of advocacy for Ukraine, whether it's tweeting about it, if you're an American, calling your members of Congress, looking out for target lists, there still needs to be massive amounts of pressure put on. But I believe we're at a process where we're getting towards a turning point where there's enough pressure made that I believe Speaker Johnson is going to have to take some action on this, or this discharge petition will happen, and he's going to have to get out of the way. And I think that's the reality of where we're at today.
But either way, like if this process is successful, whether it being through this discharge petition or in other more conventional means, when that hurdle is over, hopefully, then these triple T's, that things take time. That's when the machinery of the military might actually show that it doesn't need to take that much time before aid comes in, right?
Well,
I hope so.
I agree. And what cuts down on time is planning, training, and folks that knowing what they're doing. And I do know that since the end of last year, since the original proposal, that the DoD has been ready to go. They are ready to get aid to Ukraine. These large packages, the equipment that is part of this $60 billion to Ukraine, parts of it are prepped, parts of it are ready to get going. And I think we'll see a very swift transfer of a lot of equipment to Ukraine the minute that this bill gets passed. And it's just, the reality of it is, how quick can it happen? Is it us waiting for a few weeks with regular order? Is it waiting for a few weeks with a discharge petition, if that can get enough Republicans to sign on to it? Because no matter what, we do need a solid number of Republicans to sign on to that petition to get it to be called. Or if Speaker Johnson called this bill to come out through suspension sometime next week, that would be the fastest way to get aid to Ukraine.
Yeah, and I kind of want to leave the floor open to the rest of the people here, and we can maybe talk about like what are the things that we might see going into Ukraine. If you don't have any like final things on the actual process and how things are looking, and how you want people to act, and if they want to help.
Yeah.
Before we move further on.
Yeah, definitely. I think I always leave with a call to action, because for me, it's I'm always I'm an organizer at heart, and I want people to do stuff. So if you're listening, if you do have the ability to call folks, if you're in the United States, especially, calling is incredibly important. I'm going to give you targets, but if you're not from America and you're on Twitter, you have Twitter followers that are from America. Just make sure you push out, whatever information you see from groups like Rosum. There's a few different, individuals. There's a fellow named Forrest that puts out great information, that has up-to-date information. What I will say when it comes to targeting folks, the most important people for us to be calling, I think the first two are in the same category. We want to call as many Democrats as possible. You might want to not waste your time with the squad. It's the same as calling Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's 6 of them. But anybody else on that list that hasn't signed on, Democrats, they need calls. They can be calls from anywhere in America, especially from their district. It's better, but anybody from America can call a district and say, hey, I want you to know that I'm calling to say I support HR 1016. That's going to get the supplemental package for Ukraine on the floor. But also at the same time, we really need to target any Republican who has voiced support for Ukraine in the past. We need to give as many Republicans the courage and the support to step up and do the right thing. Right now, 41 Republicans if 41 Republicans walked in on Monday or Tuesday and signed on to this petition, only 41, we would be able to have a vote on this bill as soon as it could happen.
Yeah, and what kind of toys do you think you want to? What do you want to see being transferred first?
So again, going into not as many details as I want to give, or making sure that I keep this. I believe that what you're going to see is some of the most advanced weaponry, the most modern weaponry, both armored, artillery. When it comes to ammunition, we know ATACMS is part of this. That has been released publicly. I believe there's quite a few Bradleys that are in it, but 61 billion is a lot of money. And again, it is going to be drawn out over amount of time. But again, the funding is going to be used on what Ukraine and what the DoD thinks is needed as first and foremost. But I foresee a lot of armor. I foresee a lot of artillery, and especially I think we're going to see, some of the more advanced long range weapons. I couldn't tell you on the distance, and I think that's yet to be determined. But I think that we'll see larger numbers of them going across because of that guarantee that there's refit money, that there's modernization money to replace whatever we send over to Ukraine. And lastly, one of the things that I think that we'll see is, even the Bradleys we sent last time weren't the most high quality Bradleys. A lot of them had a lot of wiring issues. There was issues with them because they were a bit older. I believe we'll see much more ready to use equipment getting to Ukraine because of this package pretty quickly, if I was a guessing man.
I heard long range, and I say John Ridge.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to what Will has said is that the thing that I think it's important to remember, and we can go into this in more detail in terms of the actual contents of the package, but that 60 billion top line figure, that's just appropriations. That includes a variety of things. A plurality of it is funding to restock U.S. inventory, as well as the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative funding, the foreign military funding to support Ukraine, other European allies, etc. What's actually going to be available to Ukraine on a short-term basis is not actually counted as part of that. The drawdown works out to about, I believe, 11.7 billion. 7.8 in drawdown authority from the supplemental itself, plus the currently unexercised $3.9 billion worth of authority. So that is what they'll be receiving over the course of presumably the rest of this calendar year until such time as an additional supplemental can be passed. And then there's going to be, I believe, $13.8 billion, which works out to 13.5 billion in USAI from the supplemental itself, plus an additional 300 million from the Defense Spending Act. That'll be for longer term purchases over the course of this year, next year, and then plus obviously a small amount of FMF on top of that. And so that's kind of the overall commitment that we're going to see, and that gives us a pretty, wide degree of latitude to I guess to be realistic, to keep the lights on reliably through the rest of the year, and then try and position both them and both Ukrainians and ourselves to be in a good position next year, pending the results of the election, God willing, to be able to really be able to get this ball moving in a really positive direction. Would you agree with that, Will?
I would say that there's a lot of ways to get things done, and I think that when we look at this, you'll see some very creative kind of bean counting done throughout the next year, especially. I think one of the goals for this was to make sure that there was enough left over so that at least for the next 2 years, no matter what happens, there's solid support for Ukraine, which is incredibly important. And remember, this is 60 billion. This should have been around 80 to 100 billion dollars directly to Ukraine. The whole package, the whole 95 billion dollar supplemental would have been the first choice for the administration when it came to aid directly, just simply for Ukraine. So 60 billion is not exactly what we need 100%, but it is going to do a lot. it is going to do a lot. But and the one last thing I wanted to, we've talked about the guns and ammunition and the Bradleys. One of the most important things that I think that people are overlooking in this package is that there's a large amount of humanitarian aid, and I do believe, I would have to look back into it, but there's an amount of money for humanitarian aid to Ukraine, which is actually something that's really needed. $10 billion for humanitarian aid to Ukraine, which is going towards civil society, their governmental operations, things that they really need at this moment. So we want to make sure that we don't overlook how important that humanitarian assistance is to Ukraine for their fight. It is just, maybe not as important as an attack them, but it's incredibly important to keep their wheels turning as a country, and that's what that aid's going to do.
So,
Yeah.
William, oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, just to add on to that, the Ukrainian government is unfortunately currently unable to balance wartime expenditures with incoming revenue. It is absolutely vital that they receive not obviously just the humanitarian assistance, but the direct economic assistance, the direct budgetary assistance that's included in the supplemental that we've been previously providing as well, and the prior supplementals and that Europe has been providing as well. It's absolutely crucial to keep the lights on to ensure all service members in the ZSU, the Ukrainian armed forces, are paid, and to ensure just the Ukrainian government functioning as well as can be hoped under the circumstances. They need that direct humanitarian and budgetary support.
Yeah, absolutely, John. So, William, I wanted to ask, I want to say last year, you made a trip to Ukraine. You did some work advocating for, of course, veterans in the United States, and then you sort of transferred that skill set to working to help veterans in Ukraine. I was wondering if you could maybe very briefly talk about that, and then your experience in Ukraine, and also has any of that work kind of transferred over into convincing some of these congressmen and so forth?
Yeah, and that's one of the things I do try and keep separate is, simply the advocacy work and my support for Ukrainian veterans, and an organization that I helped found called the U.S. Ukraine Veterans Bridge. And yeah, we were able to go over to visit Ukraine in August and early September. We spent 3.5 weeks there, me and my executive director and a team of U.S. veteran organizational leaders and veteran advocates from America, and basically our goal is to build a bridge. And I always like to make this joke when I was in Ukraine: stronger than the Kerch Bridge, it will last longer than the Kerch Bridge, between the veterans community in America and the veterans community in Ukraine, for the right reasons, not because we want to go over and take advantage of them, not because it seems like the right thing. It's because it's the right thing to do. And we have so much knowledge around the veterans community and the activism community through veterans in America. Our goal is to help, accelerate that process for Ukraine as they start to revamp their veterans community and build a veterans community kind of from not 100% where it needs to be at to where it needs to be at. Both working with the Ukrainian government, and working, like what we like to do the most is with the Ukrainian veteran civil society. I'm working to try and turn them into the organizations and advocacy they want. That story of our trip, the story of the connection between veterans, have been very beneficial when it comes to us, telling the story of Ukraine in Washington, D.C. to other organizations. We've kind of separated the two between the aid to Ukraine when it comes to like weapons, because there's tons of people working on that. But as an infantry soldier myself, a leader of men in combat, I know there's no more important weapon than the men and women who hold a gun, say a pledge that they're willing to die for their country, and then go off to fight to defend their country. And we want to just make sure that, in the future, as packages get put together, that veterans are looked at, that, when the civil society money to rebuild Ukraine happens, that there's, lots of good support for Ukrainian veterans, because they need it right now. They're having a lot of veterans leave the military every single day because of injury and wounds, and we can't do enough quick enough to support them. But it's I can't tell you, it's an honor of my life to actually get to work with our fellow veterans in Ukraine as they learn and grow and work to help develop what their country's veterans community looks like. We're not helping them. You're not telling them what we did, just the good stuff. We're telling them all the bad stuff, the American, the struggles we've had, the issues the veterans have had, whether it was veterans coming home from World War I when there wasn't a structured community for us, versus veterans coming home from global war on terror, where we had this very diverse new set of issues in a new time. It's kind of like putting the those two ideas together to help support Ukraine. But it's been a really, really awesome project. And it has been impactful, and it's something that's going to last for a long time, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks. Erlend, do we have anything else? Otherwise, we can maybe go to Q&A. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we should go to Q&A because it's almost an hour. Did any of you guys pick any? I know there's been a lot of comments and questions that already probably have been kind of answered inside the chat. If there's any questions that you guys want to highlight.
I think there was one question about prominent Republicans in the House resigning. There have been just a few that have basically, it might be a little dramatic to say they're resigning, like in a way that would imply that they're like, getting on a podium and saying, I resign out of principle. They're more saying like, I'm not going to run for re-election. Go ahead, John.
So I'm about to say there are a couple that are actually resigning. There's others that are just retiring and not seeking re-election.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. But so I guess if William or John, if you guys have any comments on just like that, and will it affect the kind of balance in the House, right?
So I'll start off with, unfortunately, a lot of the folks who are either resigning or not going to run for office are some of the most moderate and sensible folks who try to work together, work to make things happen. I think Gallagher, even Buck. Some of these folks are folks who actually work to get stuff done. But I will say it is concerning to see the state of affairs in the Capitol Hill, where people are quitting because of the dysfunction. It's never good. I don't foresee it being that big of an issue when it comes to this time. But what it does do is give us really good targets to reach out to, because they don't have to worry about their future. They don't have to worry about the RNC coming after them or Donald Trump coming after them because they supported Ukraine in the upcoming election. So those are all members that we should definitely target and try and reach out to as much as possible.
Gotcha. And we have another question from Kellen, who's asked, do you think there's a chance that Mike Johnson could lose his speakership over basically like allowing it to happen? How much do you think that affects his personal decision to hold this up?
I definitely think that it's been a major part of his calculations so far, is the idea, am I going to lose my job as speaker, which he really cares about?
And to be clear, the mechanism by which that would happen is the way that the Republican, let's say the hard lines in the House, have agreed to allow the election of a speaker. As they said, at any time we can hold this discharge, or I shouldn't call it discharge, we can hold this vote on him, or we can get rid of him, right? And we need a new one. So that we know one representative has said, I'm going to do that if he lets the vote go forward. Is that accurate? Go ahead.
It is accurate. And we saw this play out with Speaker McCarthy. And I've heard a lot of people talk. I'm not a big fan of people who shift blame on things and say it was because of this or because of that. The reality of it, Speaker McCarthy had backtracked on two major promises and agreements that had been made with Democrats while he was in office. One of them being aid to Ukraine, one of them being government funding. And if he had just skated through, we could have seen that happen over and over and over again. And I think that there was a really big reason why Democrats did not vote for him and allow him to allow his party to do what the party wanted to do, which is remove him as speaker. That being said, I truly believe, and Speaker Jeffries has been vocal about this in the last few days, is that, and we've seen the far right threatening to call for Johnson's removal as a leader in the last couple of days also, is that I believe that this time, as long as the bill to Ukraine gets passed, the funding gets passed, I believe that you'll see, you could possibly see the Democrats not vote against Johnson if that happens next week. If I believe that you'll see, and it has been said in public that they're willing to work with Johnson if he's willing to work in good faith with us.
Yeah, motion to vacate is the term I was looking for.
Yeah, motion to vacate.
Thank you, chat. Go ahead.
There's one question I'd like to address in chat, I think, from Mark regarding the threshold for the discharge petition, given that a number of members will be technically retiring. Some of them will actually be resigning their offices before the end of their terms in the near future. Does that actually affect the threshold needed for the discharge petition? So the answer is maybe, but probably not. The explicit language in the House rules is a majority of the total membership of the House. In practice, that's usually interpreted to mean a fixed 218. In principle, the House parliamentarian can say it's either a majority of 218, or excuse me, of 435, or a majority of the currently filled seats. So again, in principle, there's a level of ambiguity there, but I'd say probably with 75% certainty, the parliamentarian's going to come down and say it's a total membership of the House in this context means 435, including vacant seats. So the resigning members probably won't affect that threshold.
Yeah, I would add to that, John, to say I would go a little higher than 70%. I'm almost certain that it will take 100 or 218 votes for the discharge. I think that's the way that it will be interpreted. But what's nice about that is that it only takes a simple majority to vote for the actual bill once the discharge petition is found in order. So 218 to get the discharge petition done, a simple majority for the overall bill.
Okay. Well, Daniele, Germinade, Andrew, do you have any questions, comments?
I personally don't have any questions, but it's great to actually get an explanation. So I'm just listening carefully.
Yeah. So if that's just kind of to close things up, I think that I hope I was clear enough. I'm trying to bring this down to a way that people can understand it. I always, tell people when you're on Twitter, when you're looking at people who call themselves experts or people who are saying this is how it is, double check, get confirmation. You can Google all of these things and do a little bit of research yourself before you put things out. Whether it's there's a giant group of socialists working against this bill when it actually is just some folks who may not have been at the office that day. Whether it's the idea that not much of this aid is going to be aid for military equipment for Ukraine. Double, triple check everything, especially going into next week. There's going to be a lot of news going out. I would say there's an account, Angry Ants. I would say I'll keep track of that account when it comes to who you need to call. But if you do have the ability to advocate in the United States, please do so. Make the phone call. If you're in Washington, D.C., go knock on an office door. If you're in your district this weekend, members of Congress, some of them will be back in their districts. Go to their office and tell them that you're important to them. If you're outside of the U.S., like I know many people for this great international group of fellows and supporters of Ukraine is, tweet about this. Tweet about how important it is that that Americans call their members of Congress and call for the passage of HR 1016 and sign on to that discharge petition. So with that, I really appreciate the time to be up here. I hope I helped. And as always, let's just keep doing everything we can every day to support Ukraine. I was lucky enough to be out pretty far with some Ukrainian veterans, and as a soldier, I know what it means to be in a pretty bad place, and but I also know what I can do as a civilian. What type of ammunition my democracy gives me, what type of ammunition the rules that govern my country gives me, and I know what I can do personally, physically, emotionally to support Ukraine. The men and women in the trenches right now trying to hold the line, they have no idea for what folks are doing to support them. They don't know if you're going to make a phone call. They don't know if you decided not to make a phone call. The only person who's going to do that is yourself. Every day you look in the mirror and you ask yourself, did I do enough for those men and women who are doing everything they can to just defend their homeland, defend their homes, to defend the future of a country. So please make those phone calls, look in the mirror every day, ask, what can I do today to support Ukraine, and continuing to do it.
Thank you so much, Will. I see a group of angry ants walking out or running out of a CV-90, the best infantry fighting vehicle in the world.
I don't know. I will say I know a lot of folks running around in Bradleys in Ukraine right now, and I will say that I think this conversation has changed from what it did earlier on last year, when it just was an automatic win that the CV-90 was better because it was newer and fancier and maybe a little sexier. But the old Bradley is doing its fair share for sure.
Yeah, of course it is, and I just wanted to say I hope it gets accompanied by hundreds more Bradleys, and we've seen incredible videos of them absolutely wreaking havoc on Russian forces so many times recently, and yeah, I wish they had more of them.
I just like that you rubbed in the CV-90 at the end of this, but really, I really appreciate this, folks. And if there isn't any more questions, I'd just love to say, Slava Ukraini and Herem Slava.
Heroim Slava. Thank you so much, Will.
We should definitely have a debate stream where you guys Erlend brings the best CV-90 footage and William brings the best Bradley footage, and you guys make your case about which is the best infantry fighting vehicle.
Germany and Ukraine can bring the 2 clips of Martyr.
Jesus Christ.
The problem is that they're in a ditch in most of them.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're all great vehicles, and we know, like the Ukrainians have said so many times, that it being in a Western vehicle, the survivability is just, that is, even if they have so much better weapons, they have so much better speed and firepower. The most important thing is that they survive even if they get hit, and I think that's something that goes home with a lot of people listening and watching this, and following the war in Ukraine, that the Western vehicles are just made fundamentally to save the crew if they get hit, and that's a common thing with the Martyrs, the CV-90s, and the Bradleys. And I hope we unfortunately don't have so many of those European vehicles around, unless we would see a lot more of them in Ukraine. There's like hundreds of Bradleys that could go to Ukraine if this bill gets passed, and I really hope that happens. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you so much, Will. I think that this really helped a lot of the viewers. At least it helped me to understand a little bit more. Yeah.
Erlend, do you want to talk about the Sunday episode?
Well, yeah. So okay, a little bit of auto promotion for Tochnyi. So we do every Sunday a episode which we call Tochnyi Weekly, where we do a review of the news, and German Aid does an update, and we also normally have a couple of different segments on culture and some military relevant topics every Sunday at I would say 8 Central European time and please help me, guys. What is it gonna be? Eastern time, US this time. It's gonna be 4. John.
What? Sorry.
So this Sunday, because we're sticking to the European times.
Oh God.
Well,
Is it 3 p.m.?
that's the
Andrew?
normal time, isn't it?
Man, I'm so bad at this. I should just cut my mouth shut.
Okay, look at our Twitter feed and press the bell on our subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell. Then you definitely will catch the stream. That is the best way, I guess, because we are so confused and I feel so embarrassed that I don't know how.
Yeah. For people who don't know, daylight savings time is starting, and in the US it's kicked in, and in Europe it hasn't. Do I have that right, Erlend?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's totally like blown our minds, like it does every year. So yeah, it's been difficult to like wrap our head around it and keep the time straight. But we're working on a better method for that and all that. But I would say just subscribe.
In future, all the tweets should have a UTC timestamp in them. So that hopefully the other timestamp should be correct, but at a minimum, the UTC timestamp should always be correct.
We used to have UTC, but we got too confused, so we got rid of it.
Yeah,
true.
That's true. It's Sulu time. Yeah, I agree.
4 p.m. East Coast US time, Erlend.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, chat.
Well, now you have conflicting people in the chat. I don't know.
I know chat, yeah, but I trust MM.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, Will. Hope to have you back soon. And yeah, Slava Ukraini.
Heram Slava.
All right, I'm Slava.
On behalf of